Let's look at envelopes a little bit more closely. Now basically envelopes are the contours that shape the sound coming from the oscillators and the filters. So what does that mean? Basically envelopes provide us shapes, just like LFOs do, shapes that we can use to modulate parameters. Now each layer has a dedicated amp envelope, amp being short for amplitude, an amplitude envelope that shapes the sound of the note over time, and it also has a dedicated filter envelope, which we've looked at. Plus, there are two freely assignable modulation envelopes that can be used anywhere in the patch to modulate parameters. So let's review what we know about the basic amplitude envelope. Now this shapes the level or the amplitude, the sound, the volume of the sound over time. So when I raise the attack, and by the way, right now we're not going to hear this affecting the sound at all because there's no time for the attack, so it's going to be full on right away in volume. And the sustain level is all the way up, so it's going to remain full volume, and there's no release and no decay, so we're going to hear one constant volume. Now it's important to understand that attack, decay, and release refer to times, and sustain refers to levels. So I'm going to raise the attack time, and it'll take a while now for it to ramp up to the full volume. I'll raise it a bit more. So it's like having a fade in at the beginning of the note. And once it achieves that level, it stays at the level that's dictated here by the sustain. So if I lower this, we'll hear it drop back down suddenly, just like we did with the filter, but now we're going to hear volume rather than frequency. So it drops down suddenly, and we can use the decay time to have it drop down or ramp down more gradually. So all this is like drawing big fades in and out in your automation, but we're basically affecting the amplitude or volume of each note. And the release time is how long it takes for the note to die back down to nothing once my finger is off the note. So keep your eye on the keyboard here, and you'll see once I release the note, it'll linger for how long? 3.42 seconds. Until it's fully died away. So this is basic ADSR, and we have the hold, and this, again, like the filter, gets in between the attack and decay. So once the volume ramps up, we can have it maintain that level for a while until it decays down to the sustain level. All right, we know all this, and we've seen how the release interacts with the release samples in some of the patches. Now what we can do also is go into the filter zoom here, and we can view these 4 stages graphically. So there we see the attack, and these basically represent the nodes up front. If I lower the attack, or rather the decay, there's our 4 stages: the attack, decay, sustain, and release. So now we'll see, if I go back, we'll see that this has been raised. So we can adjust them from here, but what's great about this, here I'm shortening the attack, and we'll see it reflected here. It's much lower now. And we have presets that we can call up as well. We can call them up from here, or we can call them up from the zoom. But where it gets really interesting here is we can add additional stages and create complex envelopes so we can have complex patterns over time. So let's look at this a bit more closely. I'm going to close this up, and I'm going to just initialize this. I'll click here and go default ADSR. Let's put it all the way up. So we're not really hearing anything. Let's put the filter on. Let's get that release down. All right, now I'm going to turn the envelope tracking all the way off, so we're not going to hear the filter envelope at all. And what I want to do is use one of the modulation sources. We'll use mod 1. So let's right-click on the cutoff, and I'm going to modulate with envelope. And due to the flex mod system, it'll automatically choose the first available envelope, which is modulation envelope 1, and it's routed to cutoff. So now these will affect the filter cutoff, just like we saw in the filter section over here in the last video. Well, let's go into the zoom, and we'll look at some more complex envelopes. So I can start by just editing this. I can lengthen the attack time. And we can see the yellow dot moving here as the envelope progresses through the stage of the note. And you see it ends here. And it's only when I lift my finger off the note that it completes the release phase, because again, that's time. Now let's look at some complex settings. I'm going to look at the drop-down menu here, and let's call up a rhythmic one. I'm going to try one here called double strokes. And let's play it with a drum groove. We'll hear it sync up. Well, not quite in sync, is it? Let's try it again with the sync button enabled. And again, you'll see that when I lift my finger off, that's when the release stage kicks in. So in these complex envelopes, the first node always corresponds to the attack, and the last two correspond to sustain and release, and then all the additional ones are placed in the middle. So let's look at how we can create some on our own. I'm going to initialize this again from the drop-down menu and go default ADSR. We can add nodes in by right-clicking. I'm going to leave the sync mode on. And let's look at these. Basically, when we have snap, it'll quantize the movement to 16th notes, and we can toggle that on or off with Option or the Alt key. So let me click on B2 here. I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to add a 3-pulse spike. So we can add varieties of shapes here. You'll see if I right-click, we can add curves, 2 different types of curves, pulse, spike, step, linear, bump, different shapes. Let's hear what this sounds like now. So that's nice, and it's in sync, and I can just raise or lower the amplitude like that of all the stages. And with snap, as I mentioned, it quantizes it. When we have lock, what happens is all points to the right of a selected point will be moved when we move a node. So let me put lock on, and let's say I want to move this one. All those stages are now moved. So we can have it ramp up for an 8th note and then kick in. We have an edit menu under here where we can double time or half time it and repeat it or unrepeat it. So let's repeat it for now. Kind of getting out of sync a little bit. Let's unrepeat it. And let's loop it. So now we'll hear this little pattern over and over again. But it's kind of an odd shape because of this over here. So let's bring that up like that, and we'll hear, should be an even 4-beat pattern now. But they're all a little bit out of sync because I moved the attack a little bit. Let's try and line that up. There we go. Let's shorten up that attack and we'll get it right in sync. Let's try that now. And let's bring this all the way to here. And let me hold down the Option key just to make sure that it's snapping right to the grid. Now it should be in sync. So there you go. That's how you create nodes, and we can, as I say, resize them. So getting back to these commands, the XY command basically constrains the movement either to horizontal or vertical, and you can toggle that with the Shift key. So when you're adjusting complex nodes, it'll restrict it to one direction. And fine just gives us a finer resolution. You'll see as I'm moving in the info tag, you'll see finer values than when it's off, and it moves by broader amounts. And finally, scale allows us to scale the entire pattern all at once. Right now I'm scaling those spikes, but basically I can scale the whole envelope if I move it in time. So let me move this, or I'll try moving this one. There we go, and you'll see it'll move the entire envelope. So let me hold down Option and snap that right to there, and we've just changed the length of our pattern now. So lots of ways of editing the pattern. Let's look at the rest of the controls. When we're not playing in sync, we can adjust the speed of the pattern here. When it's synced, it syncs to tempo, but we can slow it down or speed it up. Let's bring this back over here, and again, I'm going to hold down Option so it snaps to the 16th note, right to the downbeat. There we go. And we'll hear it in sync. I'm digressing from this for a moment. Let me command click and reset that. And we can double the time from here. Just want to show you the rest of the patterns here. Double time. And we can do it in half time just to complete the commands that are there. So when we're not in sync, we can adjust the speed here manually. And the depth basically duplicates the depth control on the front panel. It's how much this pattern is going to influence the pattern or the parameter being modulated, in this case the filter cutoff. Now let's look at the different trigger modes. We have note, legato, and song. I'm going to put it in sync, and when it's in legato mode, what happens is every time a new note's triggered, it doesn't influence where the pattern starts, the envelope pattern. It'll play through the pattern, and new notes will be added in while the pattern is going through its phase. Whereas when I'm in note mode, each time a new note is hit, the pattern will start over again. Let me slow it down to half time so we can see that a bit more clearly by following the yellow dot here. Versus legato where it plays through. And when we're in song mode, it'll follow the DAW, so if I hit a note on the second beat, it'll start from there. So it starts wherever it is based on the DAW position. Now finally, let's look at the chaos functions. There's some nice randomization possible. Let's go back to one of our other patterns. Let's go back to the rhythmic envelope, and we'll go back to that one we looked at before called double strokes. I'll just refresh your memory what it sounds like. So it works very nicely, and there's lots of additional steps added in here. We can basically randomize things by hitting the chaos button, and we can randomize the curves and the levels independently, and these sliders affect the degree to which the curves and or the levels are going to be randomized. So let's affect the curves minimally and the levels radically, and let's randomize it and see what happens. I'll try it again. So it's interesting that way. We're getting different dynamics. It's not changing the rhythmic pattern too much, but it's changing the filter amount by adjusting the level here. And we can obviously do that differently if you want, but this works kind of nicely on this type of setting with the filter cutoff. Now what we can do is use the auto button, and each time the envelope goes through its phase, it'll be randomized. Or we can go crazy and randomize both things to a very high degree, and then we'll really get away from the original pattern. Right now it has some semblance of the original one. But let's turn auto off for a moment, and I'll drag that slider up, and let's try it now. So you can see there's lots of creative possibilities and lots of nice serendipity that can happen. And finally, we have a zoom control here, and this just zooms the display so you can see however long or short your pattern is, and auto zoom fits it to the available space here. So that's it. Stay tuned. See you for more in the next video.